Hi, everyone. Welcome to, oops. Have to get my microphone ready or no one will be able to hear me. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Morbid Symptoms podcast. I'm your host, Tara Van Dyke, aka Mother of the Horde. I've recently acquired a new nickname or self-acquired a new nickname. So it's pretty cool. It's a backstory. Either you know what I'm making fun of or tipping my hat to, or you do not. But anyway, today we are doing another bad trot take with our favorite go-to Marxist-Leninist, Alexander Mckay, who's going to be up here in a little bit. And today we're going to focus on, he's going to focus his laser eye, his dialectic materialism, his knowledge of all this, that, and what have you on Chris Cutrone's recent provocation. He likes to make provocations. It's a bit of provocateur in the, in the field of Marxism that there's kind of dominant peaks, but nobody's been able to hegemonize that field for, I know, quite some time, at least in the West, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly summarize Chris Cutrone's intervention or provocation in Compact Magazine about Greenland, why not, or something like that. So basically saying, as I think he's done this before. So after Trump won in 2016, or maybe before, he was like, Trump, why not? Probably, I would imagine, because people are freaking out and he wanted to kind of play maybe the dialectical, say like, yeah, there's negative and positive to that. So let's think this through. Is it so bad or is it so much worse than if it had been Clinton, etc.? So now he's probably doing the same thing. Why not? Why not have Manifest Destiny 2.0? So not from the East Coast to the West Coast, but North and South and extend East and West. Why pretend otherwise anymore? Anyhow, I'm going to go over that, a summary of that, and also where Chris Cutrone starts with the Empire of Liberty of Thomas Jefferson. We're going to go back to the Bible a bit, because you need to go back to the Bible, I think, to really understand maybe this kind of driving force, this kind of imperial evangelical Empire of Liberty that did not start with Thomas Jefferson. And so I'm going to go over that. And then Mckay is going to come up and we're going to get into the meat of the matter with this article and why it counts a bad trot take. And you can decide for yourself, but also what we can learn from it, because there's always something, interesting. And I think there's a contradiction there with the imperialist, an imperialist Marxist who says he's the last Marxist, but seems to be LARPing or feeding into or whatever, picking up on a kind of Lockean neoconservatism that Robert Kagan would also probably totally in agreement with. So what that matters or not, I'll leave for you to decide. And Alexander is here, so I'm going to bring him up and say hello to him before I get into our little opening salvo. Hi, Alexander. How are you?
I'm pretty good, Tara. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm ready to get into it, man. I've been having, my neurons have been firing because I did a minor way back when in American literature. So that, of course, starts with the City on the Hill and the Puritans and all that stuff. So most of my historical knowledge of that period was through American literature. However, I've been thinking about that today, so it's been exciting. Anyway, welcome back. This is another bad trot take, and there's Alexander Mckay. He is our go-to person for dissecting and dispatching, if I may be so bold, these takes, but in an educational way, camaraderie way, because we're all, broken vessels. We're all, fallible and all that type of thing. And we'll try to, we'll presume good faith with our opponents or interlocutors or foils or whatever, and take them at their word, not what they might be doing as trying, maybe this is just kind of a joke, and how seriously is this really Cutrone's foreign policy, or is he trying to, poke the bear a bit? But we can't know what's in his mind. We can only know what's on the page and what comes out of his mouth.
Well, yes.
Anyway, so let's dive into a kind of a baffling case, I think, in the world of Marxist thought. So today we're looking at an intriguing contradiction. Cutrone's article, "The Future Belongs to America, So Should Greenland." and his accompanying discussion on the Compact podcast. We also looked at part of that in preparation for the show with, I always want to say Michael Schellenberg, but that's not what it is. It's somebody else. Anyway,
It's Jeff Schellenberger.
Okay, thank you. Well, anyway, 6 one way, half dozen another, baby. No, I jest. They're top shelf Schellenbergers. Anywho, so Cutrone calls himself the lax Marxist, but if you read this piece or heard him speak, I think you might wonder if this title comes with a bit of a wink. So in this article, he is making a provocation, of course. So he makes the case for what he calls the empire of liberty, a concept that draws directly from Thomas Jefferson, but is steeped in Locke's liberalism and neoconservative vision of U.S. imperialism. He argues that America's role as a global hegemon is not about domination or exploitation, but about spreading freedom. That's a novel thing. I had not heard that before.
I'm amazed that he managed to be this original. I certainly don't think that he's ripping off a certain Hitchens brother from 25 years ago.
Well, don't give the game away, Alexander. Okay, so let's see. So but he traces this back to Jefferson conveniently. But the Monroe Doctrine, but we had to go back to even the Great Christian Commission, and I can't remember if he mentions this or not, but I'm going to talk about it. So that's right. So you have Chris Cutrone, the Marx Marxist, and he's grounding his rationale for U.S. imperialism in a blend of Enlightenment thought, Christian theology, Cold War geopolitics. I'm not saying this is a conscious thing, but we can draw straight lines from what this argument is to these types of sources, or we can go back in the kind of DNA of Western imperialism in the United States. So quickly, in his conversation with Compact, he doubles down on these ideas. He critiques the left for its knee-jerk anti-imperialism, which he claims misunderstands. So you may want to write this down, Alexander. He misunderstands the potential for U.S. power. He even suggests, yes, well, this could be true. But anyway, he even suggests that Trump's outlandish proposal, I don't know how outlandish it is, but to buy Greenland reflects a deeper historical logic, one tied to America's revolutionary beginnings and its unique capacity to reshape the global order. Kagan. And just to make things, although that's true, because what I learned is that there's a lot of neoconservatives were once Trotskyites, I guess, in their youth. So I guess there's kind of
arguably they still are.
Yeah. That's your wheelhouse. Let's see what else. I want to make this summary clear because some people might not have read the article, although I don't think it's paywalled. No. Anyway, and just to make things more interesting, he positions all of this as a natural extension of Marxist thinking. I mean, who wouldn't want a Marxist to justify U.S. imperialism through Locke and Jefferson? It seems like a trifecta. Chef's kiss, if you will. But then things get a bit messy depending on your perspective. So Cutrone calls himself the lax Marxist. He claims to be holding the torch for Marxist critique in a world of ideological confusion. Yes, he likes to say, listen, children, calm down. I can call the balls and strikes. Yeah, baseball metaphor. Don't worry, I'll lead you through the ideological conclusion to the valley of our Lord, as it were. And maybe he will. I mean, I don't know. So this argument feels strange, like a cocktail of part Christian missionary zeal, part Lockean property rights, and a splash of neoconservative realpolitik, we might say. So where's the Marxism in this? That I'm gonna leave to Alexander to get at. And I have one more last thing I want to say before we get into the meat of the matter. So again, today Alexander Mckay and I will unpack the mostly him, but me. I'm gonna get my 2 cents in. We'll look at for these kind of contradictions in Cutrone's thinking and what they tell us, what they show us. It's not just about throwing darts at somebody, although we're human.
Oh yeah.
So we'll look at how he manages to kind of fold Christianity or in the back door, because he wants to focus on Jefferson, Lockean liberalism and a defense of U.S. imperialism into what he calls Marxism. Is this some strange synthesis of historical materialism and an idealist theology? Or is it, as some critics suggested, just a defense of empire masquerading as Marxist critique? Along the way, we'll look at the roots of the Empire of Liberty and examine how these ideas connect or collide with a Marxist vision of revolutionary politics, especially of the Marxist-Leninist bent. So that's my opening thing. Anything you want to say before we proceed?
Well, I would say that the Cutrone has a lot of form for this kind of manipulation of the Marxist tradition. I first came across his work, it must be 4 years ago now, when he was claiming that Lenin was a representative of classical liberalism. And this was like Lenin was in the Jeffersonian tradition. I think he's made that claim before. So this is where he likes to go with these things. And as we'll get into, this is not exactly new. This is a method that has been used before by various individuals from the Trotskyite tradition, including Max Shachtman, who was Trotsky's personal secretary, and including, of course, Michael Harrington, who was the founder of our friends in the DSA. They of the Jazz Hands Conference and announce your pronouns or be forever triggered. So this is a path that is pretty well trodden. And I will get into later some comparisons with some of the American Trotskyites and their position over the war in Vietnam in the 1960s and 1970s, which mirrors Cutrone's ramblings here. And also
Alexander.
Yes, I know. I'm giving the game away.
We were told, we've already been scolded about how fantastic his theory is.
Yeah, look,
and I would say that, yeah, it's the theory as if you just look at it in and of itself, you're like, oh, okay. But it's when other things intrude.
Well, herein lies the problem. If reality intrudes upon my perfect theory, then surely reality must be rejected. And we must retreat into a world of pure theory where Donald Trump is the new Jefferson. But we will get to all of this, Tara, in due time.
Anyway, what I would like to do, kind of ironically, because it also gives me, well, maybe not ironically, it gives me a chance to promo the next live stream that's going to be the bad anarcho-capitalist takes with our friend the social populist on Sunday. However, the target of that episode is actually my source of some of the background of this kind of evangelical Empire of Liberty. So let me add this to the stage. Oh, that's you. So yeah, this is the article that started this off, because I have a good time doing these bad Trot takes or bad Western Marxist takes with Alexander. They're fun. I also learn things. So whenever I see something, I'll DM him like, hey, is this and if it piques his fancy, then I try to, get him to pencil in a time slot. So lucky for us, this all worked out. So this is a couple of things I think I just thought was funny, and I just want to share with people. I think there's this interesting sublation to compact pipeline. So Ashley Frowley, who did that wonderful piece about how Hamas are nihilists, and anybody that supports pro-Palestine thing after October 7th are nihilists. That was a fantastic piece. I think she still have, like, I don't know, she's some in the hierarchy of Sublation magazine. Cutrone, of course, does a lot of, he's kind of the in-house philosopher king, although maybe he's been sidelined. I don't know, because I got really pissed off with how they were covering Israel-Palestine, and I undid my subscription, and I was like, it's a bit. So I don't know what's going over there since October 7th or October 18th or whatever it was that I heard their interesting takes on that. However, and I think it's kind of interesting. So I wonder if there's a parallel here between the sublation to compact pipelines. So they're kind of like the DSA to the so the Sublation magazine would be like the DSA, and compact would be like the Central Democrat Party, right?
Yeah.
I think. Okay.
Pretty much. I mean, Sublation is, I think these days it's basically Douglas Lane,
It's
and
always been, yeah, he's
so
the founder. Yeah.
he's the founder, who is some sort of pseudo Trotskyite, and he does a podcast with Ashley Frawley, who previously on another iteration of my own program I had a very interesting discussion with on identity politics. Was quite interesting, and I found some of her work to be quite a work on like happiness as a sort of key concept in or the happiness industry as a key concept in understanding this particular period of development of capitalism in the Western nations. That was all very interesting. But then again, the acid test is, well, how do you respond when an anti-imperialist struggles break out into the open? Then it becomes not just about theorizing in academic drawing rooms, so to speak. It becomes a very real thing, which could conceivably, and this has happened in Britain, it could conceivably get you arrested for a tweet, which of course the government has done. Not just it's done it to pro-Palestine people, it's done it to gender critical people, it's done it to all kinds of people. But the imperialist question and the role of Israel in particular, and the role it plays, these are third rails, which you can't touch.
Yeah, and at the very least, you'll get called all kinds of nasty things on X, and then people be like, "I can't believe I followed you," and they like announce that they're unfollowing you because whatever.
Yeah, because that's going to ruin your day. Yeah.
Well, however, will I go on? Yeah.
Well, yes, I'm going to have to go and call the Samaritans right away. But her article that you mentioned, was saying that Hamas were nihilists. I mean, that was just it wasn't even just that I disagreed with it. It was just that she was dealing in fictions. Like you can have all kinds of disagreements with the charter beliefs and operating principles of Hamas. Of course, like we're not. I don't hold, and neither do most Marxists, with some of the things that they stand for today or historically, but their role as the leaders of a national resistance movement cannot be underestimated or merely dismissed. And it is not nihilism that led them to do what they did on October the 7th or fight for 15 months afterwards against a military which is essentially an extension of the United States. So nihilism doesn't cause men and some women to fight for 15 months. That's not, I mean, the nihilists in The Big Lebowski were defeated by John Goodman throwing a bowling ball into their balls, So I don't think that
these men are cowards, Donnie. They're nihilists. Don't worry.
No, man. The Nazis, Walter? No, they're nihilists.
Who's fought for nihilism? I don't.
Yeah, like who? Other than
we want nothing. When do we want it? Never.
We believe in nothing, Lebowski. Well, why would you fight for 15 months for it? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. The only way it makes sense is it revealed something, and I think that this is a nice pivot into like the Cutrone's work, because of course this is him and Frawley and Lane all share this in common, which is that they do not agree with the Marxist-Leninist understanding and critique of imperialism and the understanding of imperialism, which was started by Lenin, who Cutrone claims to be an ardent defender of, but I don't think that he is. But also developed by Stalin, who, of course, they reject out of hand. If you do not have the understanding of imperialism, as we've discussed before, as the primary contradiction, not only facing the oppressed nations of the world, but also facing us, as it is the background, the decaying foundation upon which all manner of foul things spring up, then you don't really understand the internal situation either inside the Western nations, which I don't think these people really do. Again, like if any of them want to challenge me on this, happy to get in the ring.
Please come on. I'll be the moderator, and I'll be very nice. I can still be nice, although after the last 5 years of the gender stuff and the Israel stuff and the all kinds of other stuff, it's like I'm kind of not as nice as I used to be, but I can occasionally be. I can put on my Oxford High Table.
Yes, you can put on the hat and officiate. But if we shall we get into the business
Yes,
of
if it's okay, I would like to, if you agree it's important, I just have a couple of slides on that go back to like kind of a couple of Bible stuff and the
yeah,
Lockean
go for it.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm just going to sit back and also I should say, people, that I see that we have quite a few people watching, which I love. And I would love to be able to go through the comments, but if I'm looking at the comments and I can't be paying attention to Alexander, so what I will do, if anybody has something they really want to ask us, or an really important point, the best thing to do would be to add it to the Twitter announcement of this on either my page or Alexander's page, because I don't know if we'll be able to get to questions and comments at the end because we have a full deck. But I do appreciate them. I wish we could, but I'm a one-woman show, and I can only do so many things. So housekeeping aside, yes. So let's see. This came to mind when I was thinking about, because I'm reading it for a preparation for another episode. And Robert Kagan is neoconservative. He's considered a great historian, but he looks at this, the kind of dangerous nation. So this kind of empire of liberty that's baked in the cake, and he sees it as a good thing, as a manifest destiny thing. Whereas somebody like Thaddeus Russell, who does the Unregistered podcast, who is going to be actually the target of our bad anarcho-capitalist take on Sunday. However, you don't have to throw the baby out the bathwater. While with Thaddeus Russell, I would encourage people to take anything he says about Marxism or socialism or communism with a huge grain of salt. His program is worth watching, and he did a live stream a while ago on the Empire of Liberty. And so my background from before Thomas Jefferson's Empire of Liberty that Cutrone wants to start with, I think is important to understand the trajectory of this and how it and so we can keep that in mind to be like, what is the Marxism of it all, or not? So he says, he talks about the biblical roots of imperialism. So this is Thaddeus's argument, but also from what I've gotten through in Kagan's work, he's making some of the same type of arguments. That if you want to understand American foreign policy and especially the ideology, and that you have to start with the Bible. And so Genesis 1:8, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And the key theme that they want to take out of this is that this is kind of a universalist, absolutist claim of humanity's domination over the earth, laying the kind of foundation for expansionism. The next thing that they think is important for understanding the kind of maybe theological or ideological, psychological motivations behind U.S. foreign policy, even before there was a United States. Matthew 28:18-20. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. So, Kara, here's a theme, a divine injunction, if you will, to convert and uplift all nations, interpreted as a moral and spiritual mandate for global expansion. I think you don't have to be an expert in U.S. history, let alone Western history, to see various iterations of this. I can think of, white man's burden, the civilizational mission, and all this stuff. Just a couple more. So Christianity and empire. So evangelical Christians, from the founding fathers to the modern United States policymakers, have cited these biblical passages as justification for expansion and intervention. And he says, and I can't dispute this, that even though Thaddeus and Kagan, that even though we tend to think of the founding fathers as kind of isolationists and maybe deists, so not like these radical Christians, he was saying that there's an evangelical Christian thread, especially when it comes to their understanding of the United States and its role in the world. I can't dispute or deny that. I know that growing up, what I got from U.S. history is that, Thomas Jefferson was a deist, Enlightenment thinker, so it wasn't really like, but anyway. So his argument, Russell's argument, is that Genesis provides the premise, humanity's obligation to subdue the earth, and Matthew provides the mission. You spread the empire of liberty as a divine duty. And he talks about how this also was how they justified what they did to the Indians was kind of, well, just part of the, a collateral damage, perhaps. And then we get to John Locke. There's just two more people. Then I'm going to turn it over to, we're going to turn it over to Alexander Moore. So John Locke's biblical influence. So a quote from John Locke: "When God gave the world in common to all mankind in Genesis, he commanded man to work and subdue it for the benefit of life." So the theme here is the labor theory of property derived from biblical principles became the moral justification for taking land from unproductive peoples. You can see where this is going. And the impact is that, and he was saying that this has influenced the founding fathers' imperial ambitions. And then now we get up to where Cutrone starts off with his historical grounding with the Empire of Liberty in Jefferson's words. So we should have such an empire for liberty. Yeah, not capital, not exploitation, not domination, not any of this stuff, but liberty, like the good news, spreading the good news, baby. And, double-edged sword. Liberty as she, of course, she has never surveyed. Sorry, we should have we should have such an empire for liberty as she has never surveyed since the creation.
Hey, ladies, you've won. You've won.
I know. I'm like, wait a minute. What? We're ships and we're liberty. The massive happiness to ensue from the extending of our government. So the theme that Thaddeus and Kagan want to make is that Jefferson's concept of the Empire of Liberty is fused with biblical, Lockean, and Enlightenment ideals to justify the expansion. And here's the final one. Wrapping this up, Thaddeus Russell's argument, which I think is sound. But again, I can't emphasize enough that when he starts talking about communism and socialism and Trotskyism, you should take it with a few grains of salt. Anywho, he is an anarcho-capitalist. And that's interesting, Alexander, don't you think? So we have Cutrone, who is an imperialist Marxist, and then we have Thaddeus Russell, who is an anti-imperialist anarcho-capitalist. And if you add those together, I think you get a zero.
I think you get a perfectly round horseshoe, which looks exactly like a zero, Tara. So yeah,
cancel each other out. I mean, it's been a while since I've done advanced algebra. Okay, so U.S. imperialism is rooted in a Christian-derived moral and psychological framework. Key ideas: dominion over the earth, evangelical mission to uplift, justification through conquest through labor and productivity. So here we get some materialism. And founding fathers, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, etc., all integrate these ideas into their political philosophies and policies. So on that, I think it's kind of interesting, since he wants to present himself as the last Marxist, and I don't see very much difference from what Thaddeus Russell laid out based on Kagan and maybe some other stuff about U.S. imperialism and what Cutrone is advocating. But what do you think?
Well, I think I think you hit upon a certain reality there, Tara, which is that Cutrone is in following on in a tradition which unfortunately has been present within certain schools of Marxism since really Marxism began as a clear and coherent set of ideas and a method, which is that there have been people who from the very beginning, from the time when even Marx himself was alive, who start off advocating for the method of Marx, or at least say they do. But in reality, what they're doing is they're much more in love with the idea of what I think would be best called a certain Western supremacism, or in Cutrone's case, a real piece of American bourgeois exceptionalism. Now, Cutrone, I'm sure, will argue, and perhaps we'll get into this later, that he is provoking, that he is seeking to, he is basically having a tilt at a windmill, perhaps. But what he's essentially arguing is that it comes down to the following core ideas. One, as you indicated, that he is apparently a believer in manifest destiny. he is apparently, if it's not westward ho anymore, it's northeastward ho to Greenland, or northward ho to Canada, or maybe southward ho to Mexico. Now,
sorry, yeah, Gulf of America.
Gulf of America, that's what it is. That's the real Marxist approach. Real Marxists say Gulf of America. The issue is that, of course, like Cutrone will say, of course, that he is provoking, but of course, what he's revealing is that he's part of this unfortunate tradition that goes all the way back to people like Antonio Labriola, one of the first and one of the most prominent translators of Marx's work into Italian in the late 19th century, who declared himself to be a supporter of Italian colonialism, Italian conquest of places like Libya, Eritrea, other bits of the decaying Ottoman Empire, on similar grounds, because this isn't just an American exceptionalist thing. This is a Western supremacist thing, which is that certain Marxists have taken the rationale for imperialism as partly expressed in that sort of productivist biblical element that you were talking about just a minute ago. They've taken the idea of Marx and boiled it down to essentially the idea that what Marxism is about really is purely the development of the productive forces. And that is where the liberation comes from. This is what Labriola and people like that, and people like in Britain, like H.R. Hyndman, a friend, not really a friend, but an associate of Marx and Engels, the guy who founded the Social Democratic Federation, which ultimately merged with the Labour Party. One of the big advocates for Marx in the late 19th and early 20th century. He was also a rabid supporter of British imperialism, a rabid chauvinist. And he ended up, of course, passionately supporting British entry into World War One. And it was all done on the grounds of that the British Empire was actually developing a proletariat in these barbaric lands, and that by the bringing of civilization in the form of industrialization, we would get quicker to socialism, because these native peoples wouldn't get there on their own, and they needed the guiding hand, basically, of the industrialized nations in order to create a proletariat, which will then give them a better path towards socialism. And so what it boils down to is reducing Marxism to a narrow productivist argument. Now, Cutrone's argument when it comes to the Empire of Liberty, shall we say, seems to be following along similar lines, but he's even more idealist in his application of this, in that he's specifically arguing in the article that Jefferson's Empire of Liberty concept still holds, that the original version, the original Monroe Doctrine was, and this is an argument I've heard before from certain American pro-imperialist leftists, that the Monroe Doctrine was actually about chasing Britain and France out and Spain out of the Southern and Central American nations. And as Cutrone specifically argues in the article, that Canada is a beachhead of Europe in Northern America and must be destroyed. Now, we can all laugh at the departure of a certain Mr. Justin Trudeau, Canada's most famous black and white minstrel, but a man who declared you could have whatever gender you liked, but also the state could kill you if you were suffering from mild depression. So truly a dystopian place. But to call it like the beachhead of Europe in Northern America is a pretty useless statement, even if you regard the Canadian ruling class as a pretty useless ruling class, which they ultimately are. Now, he goes specifically and embraces the idea of the Empire of Liberty, taking a lot from Jefferson. Again, he's not the first to do this. This was Christopher Hitchens' whole gig for the better part of 15, 16 years, like from the middle part of the 90s up to his death. He was constantly on about this. He wrote books about atheism, Enlightenment values, Jeffersonian democracy, that kind of thing. And Cutrone's basically going down the same lines here. And he's framing it as a moral mission, of course, but herein we get to the point why he does this. It's because for the likes of Cutrone, they appear, I think I'll scratch the word appear, there's no need to qualify it. He does reject Lenin's analysis of imperialism, and he does reject anti-imperialism. He's very specifically rejected it and has been open about it.
He would consider both of us knee-jerk anti-imperialists.
Yes, yes. Well, jerking of the knee when tapped by the hammer of imperialism implies a healthy political reaction.
And we did not practice that ahead of time. That was lovely.
No, I didn't. That's all it. You know what that is? That's my 6 weeks of improv drama coming back right there, Sarah. So if the hammer of imperialism does not cause the knee to twitch when it hits upon the nerves, then clearly Chris has got a deadening of the nerves and he should see a political doctor, because the last Marxist apparently doesn't see imperialism as being riven with contradictions as well as being very oppressive. So if we think about why we those of us who are Marxist-Leninists see the empire of liberty, even if Thomas Jefferson was completely 100% sincere in wanting a unified republic, maybe uniting with the likes of Simon Bolivar to make one republic from the northernmost point of Canada down to the southernmost point of what is now Argentina. Let's assume for a moment that Jefferson and Franklin and Monroe were absolutely 100% sincere in wanting to do that. Well, there's a difference, though, between Jefferson's written work and his loudly expressed principles and his life and career as a thinker and philosopher. There's a difference between that and President Jefferson. And there's Jefferson, who wanted the republic of the yeoman farmer, who wanted who said that the government is best, is that which governs least, who didn't want the industrialization of the United States, who wanted this sort of almost pastoral sort of semi-rural utopianism with a frontier
slaves,
out there,
but happy slaves,
with the happy slaves who who he like in all segregationists liked rather a lot, and that was his view. That was his idyllic view of the early United States. Well, but we can't just and this is why I'm sure Chris would never be as crude as to venture into the actual reality of Jefferson the politician, because if you interrupt a perfect theory, you ruin the moment. But you can't see Jefferson the philosopher and thinker, author of the Constitution, or one of the key authors of the Constitution, author of the Declaration of Independence. You can't separate him from President Jefferson, which I know that many want to do. Many the American libertarians devoutly wish they could separate the two out, because President Jefferson actually ends up behaving a bit more like Alexander Hamilton. The two of them were, of course, rivals and had somewhat antagonistic relationship. But what does Jefferson do? As comrades who I've spoken to on my own program before have outlined, Jefferson starts the process of the US becoming a major industrial power through his time as president. Now, in my view, that cannot be separated from his earlier theoretical works, because what he faces as president, whether he wanted to face this or not, is the reality that unless the US became a major industrial power, and it couldn't remain a pastoral slave society with elegant landowners sipping, mint juleps on a veranda and discussing.
You're getting close to my namesake here. Anyway, just as a side note, if I've ever become famous, my mother had a very long delivery. And so when they're waiting for things to happen, Gone with the Wind apparently was playing on the hospital room TV, and that's why I'm named Tara. But anyway, side note.
Frankly, my dear, it's imperialism. But moving on, the question of then the presidency of Jefferson has to be addressed, because it hits the reality of actual politics. You go away from the theory and you hit actual politics, and actual politics in the late 18th and early 19th centuries is that unless you industrialize, then you are going to get re-subordinated by either England or France.
Mm.
And so Jefferson has to wrestle with this and embrace the idea of industrialization of the northern United States. Of course, the South remained mired in the slaveocracy. And I would also recommend for viewers that they do engage at this stage with the work of Domenico Lazzardo when it comes to a thoroughgoing critique of this kind of liberalism. Because when I first read that book, I had, maybe I still had some Trotskyite hang-ups myself because I didn't quite go with it when he first outlined it. But I went back and read it again recently, and yes, like what he's pointing out is that Lazzardo basically goes underneath all the words to dig out the material reality of American Enlightenment liberalism, and he finds not only slavery but all the brutality of the exploitation of the working class, the recently arrived migrant working class, and of course the violent suppression and dispossession of the Native Americans. Now, you can't then just, as Cutrone does, just pluck out the Jeffersonian idealism and present it as like this sort of permanent living thread through America, which has always been there. Now, what's true that which has always been there and has survived every sort of iteration of the American Republic and Empire is that the American presidents will always make claims based around Jeffersonian liberty or exporting their revolution to these new countries. But of course, as Jefferson faced the reality of needing to industrialize, so the post-Civil War unified United States morphed into an imperialist power via the similar processes to that which had been in place in Britain and in Germany and in France. And so, going back to the idea of, well, what happens to the Empire of Liberty? What happens to the Great Republic? Well, it becomes an empire. And it becomes an empire because it goes through processes which Chris Cutrone and his friends should understand, but apparently don't. Because if you read Marx, Capital Volume 1 and 2 and 3, if you read Lenin after him, but let's focus on Marx for now, because we apparently can all agree that Marx is good. If Chris disagrees, he should really do a video on that. But what does Marx say? Marx says in Capital Volume 2, and he's that the industrialized nations go through this process whereby the ruling class will be seized with fits of mania and will go and seek to cut out commodity production, move to a world which is purely about moving money around, moving from I mention this a lot, but Marx goes into it, and it's important, from money to commodity to money again. Just then you cut out the commodity production. You just go from money to money. And alongside that process comes the declining rate of profit, the declining ability of capital to profit off the employment of labor in the US, and the beginning of the US to be an imperialist power as it seeks to export capital rather than actual commodities. Starts in arguably as early as the 1880s. And the US goes into this imperialist period. So that material process then has to have a effect on the concept of the Empire of Liberty, because it's no longer being sold as the idea that you are extending Jeffersonian democracy to Cuba, which they weren't, by the way, or extending it to Haiti when old Teddy Roosevelt sent the Marines in to occupy Haiti. Was he extending Jeffersonian democracy to the Haitians? Or was he restoring a form of colonial control in order to enforce the debt claims of New York banks? Well, let's again intrude upon the realm of ideas with material reality. I know this is going to upset a lot of people who don't like that, but material reality actually is quite clear, which is it was to enforce the debt claims of New York banks over Haiti, because the New York banks had been buying up debt from the French, who were still owed a load of debt from the Haitians, who had the temerity to free themselves from slavery. So the interaction of the material reality of the transition of the US from a republic to being an imperialist power naturally has its impact upon the ideas that are used to justify various different things, the narratives of the US ruling class. So when you become an imperialist power, your narratives change along with it by interacting with the material base. This can't be helped. And so the realm of ideas, the realm of the Jeffersonian mystique is not the same after that interaction with that new material base of the United States as it would have been in 1780 or 1790. It can't be. And so to say that it can be, or to say that there is this uninterrupted thread, well, I'm afraid that just isn't true. The words are there, but the actual reality of what they would mean if Trump puts this into practice, well, let's ask the question: what does this mean for the Greenlanders? And what it would mean, again, to bring in material reality, is that the Greenlanders would probably, if at best, they would be employed in the rare earth metal extraction business, which is what not really Trump, what the US ruling class actually wants from Greenland is the rare earth metal supplies that they are not going to have access to in Russia, or looking more and more likely in Ukraine or in China, and that the Europeans, or Afghanistan, that the Europeans are losing access to in the Sahel. Well, Greenland's got a load of them, so let's go and seize control of that. Danes won't do anything to oppose us, and that's the reality. Your Jeffersonian empire of liberty comes down to a paper-thin justification spread over brutish extractivist policies in a place like Greenland.
Yeah, and since I'm a geographer, I'd like to say that just as a theory, I mean, I think that, I could be wrong, but if we were to overlay a map of where we have brought liberty and salvation, and also a map of where there were important strategic resources or logistical points in the world, they would probably overlap, I'm guessing.
Yes.
But anyway.
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny how liberty suddenly is needed in these places where important resources are held. But the point about, I mean,
I think Yemen needs to be solved.
I think Yemen needs some serious attention from the legacies of Benjamin Franklin, that kind of thing. I mean, Chris Cutrone makes the point in his essay that he's discussion with Schulenberger that he is looking to adopt a positive program. I think this is an interesting way of putting it. And
USAID does the same thing, don't they? And DFID?
Yes. It's funny how this always keeps coming up. And those are USAID and the NED are two organizations which, of course, have had a lot to do with American Trotskyism over the years, funnily enough.
The Empire of Liberty, yes.
The Empire of Liberty and the Permanent Revolution apparently go alongside each other very well. But I think the point about Cutrone's statement that he's adopting a positive stance and that the future is America's and that the left is mired in negativity. And when he makes his provocative point and says, well, why not Trump? He expects to get, of course, a lot of reaction to him from the likes of, ourselves, but from the likes of some of his erstwhile allies, like our friend Mr. Tutt. But yes, exactly. That's the
curator of the course. He's having a great week. Anyway.
Oh, he's in heaven. But the point is,
sorry.
Yeah.
He deserves it.
Yes. I observe all things and am father to all men. Maybe. The point about the positivity, though, and the point about where Cutrone says, well, why not Trump? That is actually a little bit interesting, because he is able to get away with that and to sort of make that point and act as the great provocateur, because he has actually hit upon a certain truth in what he says there. It's just that his program is garbage. What he says, though, when he says, like, well, why not Trump? That is, as in a question that is put to the US left, that is a legitimate question. That is a legitimate point to make. So I'm being as fair as I can here. Because if Trump's program is this sort of retrenchment, U.S. imperialism, focusing on like the seizing control over the imperial core, Canada and Greenland and Mexico. Okay, that's Cutrone seems to be arguing that's a positive program, and he's saying that the US left is mired in negativity and doesn't have a program. Well, on that point, he's right. On that point, that he's able to make that point in a strong way, because yeah, he is correct. The US left has no program.
So are you saying, did he, I missed this in the article, did he say that we've tapped out on genders? There's no more genders coming out because of a positive program?
He didn't mention that, but I think he's given up. I don't know if he was ever an advocate for the genders.
Oh, he walked the line. He was very careful. He was very careful.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
So he was. So are you saying the last Marxist wasn't being bold when it came to the gender question, Tara?
He never had been. No.
Well, what a surprise! Turns out he's only bold.
Shocking.
Yes. Well,
I mean, he's so brave. He'll take the slings and arrows.
Yeah, he will boldly back the sitting president of the United States. Such courage we have not seen since they stormed the beaches of Normandy.
Well, it does make him. He may get some side eyes at the DSA for that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he lives for those sort of transitory frills. The interesting thing is, though, and this is where he's able to make this point, because the DSA, the American left, even the pseudo Marxist Leninists, the fake Marxist Leninists of the PSL, Party of Socialism and Liberation, which don't stand for socialism, don't stand for liberation, and specialize in, I don't know, drag queen brunch or whatever the hell it is they're doing these days. Drag queen brunch with the FBI. But that left that you and I have talked about before, Tara, they are all in with the Democrats. Now, they might not say they are for 3 years out of 4, but come election year, it's vote Biden to stop fascism. Vote for Strom Thurmond's old buddy to stop fascism. Vote for Kamala to stop fascism. Never mind the genocide. Trump, the fascist, will do the genocide in a more impolite fashion. He won't even let you express your full range of gender identities whilst carrying out the genocide. How rude is that? But the point being is that if the American, it is nihilism of the worst kind. If the American left stands for the doing apologetics for the actually existing Democratic Party and sort of laundering their reputation in academia, basically, and apologizing for or promoting all kinds of strange, actually dead-end nihilistic stuff, like gender ideology, like what I will call climate apocalypse porn and various other things like that, then Cutrone is in a way right about one thing, which is, well, why not Trump? Because if you're going to go all in with that, then what is the material actual difference between the Trump presidency, the previous one, and this one, and the 4 years of Joe Biden? Now, there isn't one. Not really very much. I mean, you can say that Trump is being more aggressive in certain claims. So by pressing the claim to Greenland, which is in reality, I think he's not going to incorporate it into the United States. I don't think. I think he'll settle for exclusive mining rights over all the minerals. That's what he'll do. Now, Cutrone claims that this will be positive because it will free Greenland from Danish oppression. Now, what it would actually do was, if Greenland, via Trump's destabilizing effect, becomes independent, the likelihood is, and here we go back to the certain Marxists, or I would argue fake Marxists, support for colonialism. What it would actually do is it would become a neo-colony of the United States. The United States ruling class would not be actually interested in running Greenland. They would get a bunch of local stooges to do that for them. What they're interested in is controlling Greenland's territories, having military outposts there, controlling the sea lanes, and controlling the rare earth metals. So controlling everything apart from the government section, where you just basically delegate that to somebody else. That's what they're interested in. And so the great empire of liberty, again, comes down to a squalid resource grab and essentially an imposition of a neo-colonial regime on Greenland, where it'll have its flag up at the UN, but every single decision that gets made in Greenland will be one that is made ultimately in Washington, D.C. And so what they've gained is flag independence, but nothing else. So again, Cutrone's defense of this, saying, oh, well, they'll be freed from European colonialism. Well, Chris, you're 200
that,
years.
that healthcare or what?
Yeah, freed from the Danish healthcare system, and you can have the American one. There you go. Don't you feel more free? But I mean, what Cutrone seems to be doing, and I think this goes to the question of like romanticization, is he like many others who were, well, shall we say, put themselves in the service to the ruling class. You see the same attempts here being made by the former Trotskyites, or perhaps current Trotskyites, of Spiked magazine, if you're familiar with those particular repulsive selection, people like Brendan O'Neill. What they are doing and what Cutrone
very
is
upset
doing,
about the ceasefire, by the way.
very upset. The
You know.
real leftism demands genocide. But the point about both of them is that they are seeming to be getting involved in this sort of attempt to find a bold, heroic narrative which their chosen political projects can attach themselves to. So Cutrone clearly is looking at the idea of expansionism into Canada and Greenland and wherever else Trump throws a dart at on the map in the morning. That is going to be like, this is going to be the opening up of the new frontier. The frontier was in the expansion westward, was the sort of great it was part of the great hope in the United States. It's what it managed to absorb the great waves of migration into the United States. And it was part of what fueled the great optimism in the post-Civil War era. So Cutrone seems to be casting about, looking for these positive elements in the opening up of new frontiers, and in the belief that this will cohere around the Trump project as a unified sort of national narrative, which can be used to knit back together again a sort of fractious, divided US society. I think that's what maybe Cutrone is interested in. I think that's what Schellenberger, Jeff Schellenberger, and the Compact crew, they are definitely interested in that. So I don't know if Sohrab Ahmari is still involved in Compact. Yeah. But people like him, they were very interested in finding this narrative around which they could sort of construct what they viewed as a renewed conservative social democracy, which is what Compact magazine is ultimately in favor of as an editorial stance. And so Cutrone is obviously, he's on that beat now. He's doing some intellectual work for them in constructing that. And just as, to return to our old friend Daniel Tutt, just as he has to construct a version of the Democratic Party, which is rooted in the mythology of FDR, so Cutrone, Jeff Schellenberger, Sohrab Ahmari, and others are now constructing this sort of mythological version of the Trump movement onto which they pin their hopes for a revived social democracy. You see, they're not all that different to the likes of Daniel Tutt, the DSA, the PSL. It's just that they have chosen to hang their fantasies around the other end of the US bourgeois political system. And therein lies Cutrone's efforts to they hope, just as the pro-democratic party DSA types hope that that Biden or whoever it is next can revive US social democracy, which they can then be the left wing of that Democratic Party coalition. And so Cutrone and Schellenberger and the Compact crowd hope that the Trump movement can morph into some sort of conservative social democracy where the sort of respectable working class is brought back, and the post-war mythological order of every American worker having a wife, 2 kids, 2 cars in the driveway, etc., is revived. But this time it's the Republicans doing it, not the Democrats. The grim reality for both of them is that these fantasies, and they are fantasies, are completely divorced from material reality, evaporate on contact with the real world, and only really serve to make excuses for those already in power, which is why I routinely refer to as Trump as the white Obama, because just as Obama had fantasies placed on him by leftists for 8 years as to what he was doing. Oh no, he's he wants to do all these things, but it's the bad Republicans that are stopping him. If only we lost control of the Senate, et cetera. Or it's the
or
bad.
just wait. He's playing an ultra sophisticated game, and what looks like to be a sellout or to be problematic, actually, if you wait long enough, it'll all come clear.
It's going to come to fruition any day now. Those executive orders at the end of his presidency will be amazing, just like Biden's. But the problem for the pro-Trump people, and I'm going to now count Cutrone as like a pro-Trump guy, is that they think that the Trump movement is going to lead to reindustrialization, a renewed, confident working class that can stake its claims to a renewed social contract. You hear this a lot from American leftists, whether they are pro-Trump leftists or pro-Democrat Party leftists, that the social contract has broken down. If we go and examine this, the social contract in reality was a temporary period of concessions that lasted around about 25 years in the United States before it started to get rolled back. And if we want to be picky about this, and we should, it was never fully applied to large elements of the US working class anyway. The model, the fantasy of what the American worker was in the 40s and 50s applied, I would argue, principally to well-paid industrial workers in Chicago, New York, maybe peak period Detroit, and a few other American cities. It didn't apply in the American South. Certainly not to the black working class population. Arguably not to large elements of the white working class population either. This view of the American worker as as enjoying the richest life in all things is a construction. It is an unrepresentative sample that people like our friends on the various social democratic elements on the left and the right take as like the model that they want to get back to, but which of course is only possible because of American imperialism. It is only possible because of the huge wealth generated by American imperialism in the early part of the 20th century, the great benefit that they reaped from being able to take over loads of markets from European imperialism after World War II, and that they could make concessions to certain upper layers of the American working class. So there's your American social democracy. It runs the same way as the old European social democracy. And again, like this resulted only in a divided working class, which was ultimately, some of it was bought off, some of it was repressed, and ultimately the concessions are all taken away bit by bit by bit. Now, US imperialism is in such a dire state that it can't reindustrialize. It's too far gone. It's every time it gets any state subsidies, whether they come from Biden or they come from Trump, they just go straight into a stock buyback scheme, and like very little new productive capacity is put on. And so, where's the grand revival that
well, he seems to think that if tariffs and tax cuts, right? That's what he said. It's like tariffs and tax cuts will be enough to incentivize private capital and other things to invest back in America, I guess, to pick up roots wherever they are in that bad China, who was really wrong to take up over industrialization, bastards. Anyway, and how dare they shift from capital labor intensive to capital intensive? That was not supposed to happen. But that's a different issue. Yeah. But I want to say something before we move on, before I forget, because I am a geographer by training. And I'm thinking about this frontier thing, which of course has a romantic aspect, but also has very much a geographical one. And I was thinking about David Harvey, but not just David Harvey, but like Neil Smith and all those kind of economic geographers, with the argument that one of the ways that capitalism gets out of its crisis through kind of a spatial fix. So either you have to intensify markets or commodification, marketization where you already are, or you expand them. And also, if you, and if you have too many people and you can, figure out a way to get them sent someplace else, or the push and pull of migration and whatnot. And so it's kind of interesting how also, I'm guessing, Canada never thought that it would become a periphery. So it's kind of like the core and periphery can also change. And also, I think that it's interesting that it can be we tend to think of the frontier as like, there's the wilderness, there's the civilization or the urban and the agriculture, and there's the wilderness. But it can also be that it's a political and economic process. If you start to shake or undo kind of if there's been a settlement over like property and power, if that becomes kind of opened up to kind of a Wild West type of thing. And then at some point, once probably the people who have the most at stake are happy with the current distribution of goods and power, then all of a sudden they want to formalize it and whatnot. So I'm thinking it's kind of interesting that this is his argument, not just the romantic thing of kind of wanting to see this kind of way of getting out of this morose or this negativity, but also it's part and parcel of one of the things that capitalism has done to deal with its crisis is to spread them around, to postpone them. This what Harvey would call the spatial fix, usually in terms of the overproduction of capital, but that could be for other reasons, be also people or whatever. And so I just kind of think is there? Could you see that's also there's the romantic element in this, and the kind of but also an accelerationist, maybe.
Yes, I think to draw on your example of the frontier as the place where the surplus population can be sent, where where new opportunities arise, where a place can be settled in terms of suppressed and then ready to
urbanized also,
urbanized, etc. That was a key part of like Western imperialism for US, British, French imperialism for quite a long time. The British in particular were phenomenally successful at turning settler colonial nations into longer lasting nation states. I mean, yes indeed. Hello.
Sorry. Anyway,
there's a problem for this now, though, which is that even if the US goes for this maximalist agenda of trying to incorporate Greenland and Canada into the United States, well, there's a reason why Greenland is sparsely populated. It's not easy to live there. There's a reason why the Canadian population mainly lives on the long American border. Again, it's hard to build and to live up in the Arctic region. It would take a gigantic amount of investment to create opportunities there. And the US ruling class is not in an investing frame of mind. And materially speaking, they can't invest because their whole system's actually spinning around giant amounts of debt, which it's unstably sitting upon. The productive capacity of US capitalism inside the continental United States is getting lower and lower. So expanding the land base of the United States isn't going to solve any of those problems. When they were doing westward expansion over 150 years ago, you had a growing and very effective industrial base in the eastern and central United States that was essentially underpinning all of this, which required new land, which required new resources to be found and exploited and incorporated into the Union. Well, what are they going to do in Canada? What are they going to do with Canada that they can't do now? Canada is a podcast I listened to a while back said that Canada is essentially 5 or 6 mining companies masquerading as a country. And the principal place they sell to is the United States. So what's the US ruling class going to get out of like expanding the frontier into Canada and taking over 30 odd million Canadians, many of whom don't want to be American citizens anyway? So what are they going to do with that? Are they going to settle the Arctic Circle? Is this some kind of have the grand fort wizards in Compact magazine come up with this as an idea? Are they going to settle Greenland? How does this work? Like this is the problem with this is that like much of this idealism, reactionary idealism, it's not based on an assessment of material realities of US power as it is currently constituted. It is basically a bunch of abstract wishes, which aren't connected to the real world at all. Like in reality, does the US ruling class want to get involved in the business of managing an additional 30 million into the US population? But not just 30 million people who just came across the ocean from some desperately poor European country. The 30 million people who come from a high income country with a different governmental system to the United States, with a different understanding, to go back to the social contract again, a different understanding of what the social contract has generally meant in the in Canada than the United States. And
well, they might be wooed by our fantastic healthcare system.
Well, who wouldn't be? Who wouldn't be? You know, you got to put it all.
Education, you know,
Yeah,
40,000 a year. Come
on. So what?
No
if,
DEI anymore, so they take care of that.
Well, that's why Trudeau resigned.
Unless you're from a certain place, anyway.
Yes. Only diversity, equity, and inclusion for those who are chosen settler colonial projects.
Yes.
But I don't think that the US ruling class is going to actually want the business of incorporating millions of citizens who have a higher expectation of what government services are into the currently constituted United States. It's just not something they're going to be interested in. They're interested in Canadian oil and Canadian mining operations, but they can get hold of those if they're, you know, tame Canadian Trump, Pierre Poilievre. If he gets in, well, he'll just sign over everything Trump wants him to. And they'll get everything they want out of that anyway. And like this great project, which Cutrone and the others are involved in, will just remain purely on paper. Now, I did want to just go to the moral superiority question, because I think that is interesting to address, because this is actually a core component of left-wing anti-communism and left-wing anti-communism support for imperialism, which is the idea that, say, if you look at like the likes of Max Shachtman or you know, the likes of Michael Harrington and others who were at best ambivalent about the US role in a place like Vietnam, at worst openly in favor of it. What they will argue, and you can see this in some of their writings, is that the Western, mainly US, concept of liberty, as in the concept of the sovereign individual being the core of political projects, the sovereign individual as analyzed and, you know, embraced, promoted by Enlightenment liberal thought. John Locke, you can argue, like the French Enlightenment philosophers, Denis Diderot, maybe Rousseau to an extent, but I would argue he had much more in common with the later developments in Marx. But certainly Locke, certainly the French philosophers of this pre-revolutionary period, certainly like Jefferson, the idea of the sovereign individual. Now, these people who are not mostly but not exclusively Trotskyites do is they take that concept, which is a bourgeois concept, because it is based upon the developments in bourgeois philosophy of the sovereign bourgeois individual, defined against the dead hand of feudal absolutism and feudal collectivism. That's what it's defined against. John Locke's concept of the right to rebel against a government which no longer acts in your interest comes from, of course, the English Civil War, the actions of Charles I, and is later seized upon by the US founding fathers as a key justification for their own rebellion. And it is based upon the idea of that the dead hand of absolutism is interfering in the essential liberties of the bourgeois person, meaning their right to enjoy their property. To use Locke's analysis, it's you
mix your labor around,
mix your labor around with something. Yes, you have the right to enjoy it regardless of the opinions of the king. And so this idea of the sacred individual is a bourgeois idea, because, as Lizardo rigorously points out, it can't be a proletarian idea. Because that's not how the early US proletariat, never mind the British proletariat, actually lived. You weren't a sovereign individual. You were told that you were, but again, you go to the reality and you were not. You had to work, or you got thrown in a workhouse. And if you didn't like the workhouse, you could starve. It's essentially freedom to starve, as many communists have said over and over again, particularly from that period. And what you have, though, is a trend stemming, I would argue, from Thomas Paine, where you get that a repeated attempt by left liberals or social democrats later on to take the idea of the sovereign individual unchanged and then be able to apply it to the idea of that we're going to liberate the proletariat. That what is wrong with Enlightenment philosophy and the ideas of the founding fathers is not that these things were limited by their class origins, and that to actually honor the progressive elements within them, we have to analyze them and overcome them, and that they are incorporated into our new our communist politics in terms of we have a line of dissent from them. We take the undeniable progressive elements from a John Locke or from a Hegel or from a
Thomas
Rousseau
Paine, yeah,
or from Thomas Paine. And but again, to go back to the sublation word, these are then incorporated into a communist politics, because these are a line of dissent that comes through Marx and form his engagement with and critique of and rejection of large elements of that legacy forms the basis for for dialectical materialism, or a large part of it. Now, to me, that's a pretty standard understanding of the line of descent from the Western philosophical tradition into Marx. The problem with like those who follow from Paine, and I would argue anarchism also plays a part in it, also does this, it still clings to that sovereign individual, and the sovereign individual and rights-based theories applied to the sovereign individual, and uses that as a critique of communism in the 20th century, saying that the sovereign individual has to be free to do X, Y, and Z. And
if not, then it's totalitarian, right?
Yes,
isn't that kind of
yes, yes. Big thank you to Hannah Arendt, by the way, for that particular joy. But this is what the entirety, I would argue, of the British left, whether it calls itself Trotskyite or social democratic or Bennite or Corbynite, this is what it's all based on. It's all based on like a read of the development of history, which still seeks to keep this bourgeois concept at the center of it. It's not, as Marxist Leninists try to do, saying that the bourgeois concept of the sovereign individual is inadequate for our needs. It needs to be analyzed, critiqued, and overcome in terms of how we conceive of the individual in the proletarian sense. And the full development of the individual in the proletarian sense can only happen as part of the total liberation of the proletariat as a class. And it is I would argue that the freedom of individuals under communism, first of all, comes from the fact that we seek to address the single biggest barrier that ever actually existed for the proletariat in terms of the rights-based concepts of the bourgeois philosophers, which is the material want angle. Like, without a solid material base, you cannot enjoy all the fruits of the wonderful Enlightenment tradition that Chris Cutrone and others are so married to. So therefore, we seek to do two things. We seek to address the material lack that prevents the full engagement of the proletariat with politics. It is a real structural barrier that is never going to be gotten rid of under capitalist society. So you address, as far as you can in the initial period after the proletariat comes to power, the material lack, but also at the same time, to reinforce that, you then bring real power to the proletariat for, I would argue, the first time, by actually having the proletariat assume a collective responsibility for the management and planning of economy and society, which is the communist argument. This is outlined very clearly in both Lenin and Stalin. Now, here I'll get to come back to our friend Chris. He rejects all of that tradition. He sees it all as totalitarian. He would argue, along with the likes of Arendt and others, that it was all a suppression of the individual under the great morass of the party and the state. Whereas I and others just have a fundamentally different vision of what the concept of the individual should be. again, like, it's not to say that the development of the concept of the individual under the Enlightenment philosophers was negative or reactionary. It's just that, as many point out, as Marx himself points out, as Engels points out, as later Lizardo does, and many others, that it is inadequate for the needs of the liberation of the proletariat.
Well, isn't this also we could understand that to look at it historically rather than ahistorically, or like some sort of theological thing to attain, or just, I guess, to accept it's already there already, is that if you look at the old standby of the forces in relation to production, there was a particular period in time when this concept of the individual emerged and was made a lot of sense. But then it's I guess it's also kind of a Hegelian thing that eventually it becomes a fetter or a barrier to a further progression or sublation. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think,
and we're really not wanting to look at that because we want to hold on to this notion of liberal democracy and somehow square that with the socialism that we think we want.
Well, this is actually a really interesting point, which goes back to previous discussions that we've had as well, Tara, which is that why the frustration of Friedrich Nietzsche? Because the idea of the great and heroic age of the bourgeois individual had already passed by the 1870s and 1880s. That was already gone. So the heroic age of the individual bourgeois striding forward to break the fetters of absolutism, that's all gone, because what you've got now is the reality, which is that the bourgeoisie has become bureaucratized. It has become the old concept of the freedom of the individual has actually become, as you said, a fetter upon the advancing forces of production, because the forces of production have reached a point where it can no longer be controlled by one bourgeois individual or even a group of bourgeois individuals. It has to be collectivized amongst the entire bourgeoisie via the methods of share ownership, via the methods of putting in place professional management over capitalist enterprises. And that means basically that the time of the heroic individual under capitalism is basically done.
Maybe that's what's really appealing about the frontier.
Yes, and this is why Chris is getting his Stetson on, and he's getting ready to advance his claim in Canada.
Urban cowboy.
Yeah, Nunavut will be his. It will be the place of pure socialism. But you're right. That is the appeal, because it's like it is an attempt to overcome the limitations of this heavily bureaucratized, depersonalized almost capitalist system, which exists, which is the really existing form of capitalism, which exists is inside the United States and Canada right now, which is that there's, to go back to the old line from the Stranglers, no more heroes anymore. So by breaking new ground and like going into new and exciting places, Chris and Jeff hope that they can rediscover maybe American manhood itself. Maybe they can
there's a lot of discussion about who's a man and who isn't a man and what a leftist man is, I've noticed in the interwebs.
Yes,
that's a separate issue. I don't know what's going on there, but anyway.
Well, have you got 10 hours to spare? It might take a while. But it is that thing of like desperately trying to overcome the contradictions of the actual reality of capitalism in the continental United States now, as part of as being a decaying imperial system, and therefore which again is heavily bureaucratic. It's all run by managers. It's all run by salaried appointees. Like there's reason why they get so obsessed with like people like Elon Musk, who appears to be the bold individual who is free of the fetters of bureaucratic imperialist society. Of course, he's a pure product of them, and it's all PR and it's all image making. But his fanboys, who spend so much time on the internet defending him for free, by the way, or I at least hope that some of them are getting paid. They refuse to accept the reality that this is actually just a guy who's a shady Pentagon contractor who is leveraged up to the eyeballs with various different loans he's had to take to acquire certain things.
And my guess is that if he that off the record, he's probably a Yarvanite, yeah, that believes in that there's different, it's only a small step from meritocracy to meritocracy, not just about economic opportunity, but also political participation. But people don't want to say that. But I think I think him and Yarvin probably would get along quite.
They would.
Well.
They probably go to the same. They probably go to the same shroom parties together in an exquisite loft in Manhattan somewhere. Do some micro dosing and some free form thinking. Where Elon just turns to Curtis and says, "Hey Curtis, I've been thinking. What if we actually just had like an aristocracy, but we just called it something really nice, like apartheid?" Yarvin's just like, that's fucking deep, man. That's fucking deep, Elon. The people aren't ready to hear that truth yet. But this is where all the whole thing just falls to pieces, because like the frontier now is closed. Like, I mean, you're not, most you're going to get out of Greenland is a mining operation. Not, this isn't, Chris Cutrone is not John Wayne riding on horseback across the frozen tundra. In reality, you're going to get what? Mining deals out of Canada and Greenland. That's not going to resolve all these huge problems which are troubling the world of leftist American.
Is that going to make people want to have babies again, or?
Probably not. The prospect of setting up a community in Greenland.
People are going to have cyborg children, So first it was like a lot of people having pets instead of kids, and then it'll be like this.
Well, yeah, you basically end up with a bunch of people who are obsessed with just live on memes and raise children who are just AIs, which is probably quite appealing to the likes of old Curtis Yarvin. But the fact frontier is the back to the frontier, we seem to be in a time of like fevered delusions and fantasies, where they're all desperate to discover like something which will snap the imperial power out of the malaise.
They're tired of the interregnum. It's been fun, but now they want it to end.
Yes, and this is where you end up with. Chris Cutrone will not be the first man to go from some form of like socialism to supporting an emperor. Proudhon walked this path before him a long time ago.
This shit has taken too long.
Yeah, so let's accelerate. Let's take over Greenland and Canada, and let's see where we go from there. Again, the reason why like this project of Cutrone and Compact has taken off is precisely for, again, the reason that there's no positive project of the left at all inside the United States. The only ones who are trying to do it are the American Communist Party. Everybody else is basically just going around in a circle, like endlessly repeating like the past 60 years. You have like an absolute monomaniacal obsession amongst the American left with recreating like the late 1960s, which again you can't do, and nor should you try to. You also have like an obsession with clinging on to the left that has existed since the year 2000, which again is just not worth doing, because that ended with all leftism stood for was pronoun policing and apologetics to the Democratic Party,
and remembering the good old days of what might have been.
Yes. Bernie. Oh, yes. Do you remember when we were?
He would have won.
Yeah, Bernie would have won if only he'd come back. And by that I mean not to justify Israeli genocide, so again, like you can spin this sort of what I would call like a neo-Reaganite fantasia as an optimistic turn, only if your only adversary is essentially Verso Books and the various like representatives of American leftism. Because next to them, Ben Burgess, give them an argument, Ben.
McManus, was that?
Yeah. Sam Cedar, various others. If you take your opponent to be them, then yes, you can say we are the optimists. We want to see the further development of America, etc., etc. Whereas our opponents are only interested in obsessing over the past. And if you define the entire argument as that, then yes, you will come out of it looking like you at least have something to say, because your
like
opponent,
the grown up in the room.
Yes, he like the way that Chris addresses his children. But the other point
metaphorical
is,
children, the Marxists and whatnot, to lose their head, get confused, and
yes, they need this the firm paternal guiding hand of Chris Cutrone to lead them onto the true path, which is the road to presumably endorsing J.D. Vance in 4 years' time. But then again, you have to, if you're Chris Cutrone, you have to define your argument as being with these like representatives of the American left. You can't, you don't want to address like maybe he can prove me wrong by taking up this challenge. You don't want to address the point about like what American imperialism really is. Again, to go back to our previous critic, don't get in the way of the perfect theory. Don't let reality get in the way of the perfect theory, because you look at what the real world American imperialism, which is stretching over the last 100 years. But let's just use the example of the post-World War II era, which is rather than, as Chris would claim, as the Jeffersonians would claim, dismantling European colonialism, saving European imperialism from destruction at the end of World War II. That doesn't sound like the carrying on of the Jeffersonian spirit to me. Or like all of the suppression of anti-colonial movements that the US has engaged in, including ones that, by the way, were not communist and which actually favorably cited the American founding fathers in their justifications, such as
not nihilist. That's important.
And definitely not nihilist. Can't have those nihilistic national liberation fighters who believe in nothing and also national liberation. Okay.
We have a good time here, don't we?
Well, this is where you come for the critique.
This is not alcohol. I just realized that the can might look like that. I'm not imbibing. It's some sort of weird.
No, this is too early.
Not that I would be wrong, but it's not 5 o'clock yet.
It's too early for Marxism after dark. And I am.
Oh, but you should see when Alexander gets the red light going on behind and it starts swirling around. Then
when I
he puts on his Che Guevara hat.
When I sort of take on the role of a Marxist Oliver Reed, then it gets really interesting. But the fact that Cutrone and all the others, I mean, I'm not just going to limit it to him. Let's throw it at. I'm
sorry. Give me a moment.
Okay. The talk of Marxist Oliver Reed is too much for you, clearly.
Okay, I gotta. What I need to be the mother of the horde here, right?
Yeah,
I gotta run a tight ship.
Recenter.
Okay.
The fact that like the likes of Cutrone and Tut will not engage with the actual real world examples of like what American power really is, whether it is a Democrat at the top of the particular pile, or whether it is a Republican, whether it is Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, or Donald Trump, or J.D. Vance, just says that like none of these people are remotely serious about actually confronting any of the real world contradictions. They're not. Like they might say, well, I'm in favor of a strengthened workers' movement. Well, okay, let's just briefly break that down and look at what that would mean. That would mean that the American working class becoming increasingly unified and discovering through pressing forward its claims, even on something quite basic, such as being able to earn enough to be able to eat without getting themselves into gigantic amounts of credit card debt, or being able to actually afford healthcare treatment and things like that. Even if they pressed forward wage demands based on being able to address those very basic needs, they would find themselves in a fundamental confrontation with the US ruling class almost immediately, which not only does not want to pay them enough to actually cover those basic needs, but actually cannot do it. That's the thing. They cannot do it because the system has decayed to the extent that the actual profitability of American capitalism inside the continental United States actually isn't very good anymore. Where so much of American, so many American corporate structures are so mired in debt, they are effectively zombie companies, whereby if you actually disturbed the basis upon which that debt is handled in the various different ways in which it is traded, in which it is held by banks, in which it is basically kept to a minimum payment schedule. If you disturbed these arrangements in the smallest of ways, through like giving higher pay settlements to loads of different workers groups, etc., then the whole system would start to shake uncontrollably and would start to look as if it was going to fall to pieces, which it might. So herein we have the problem, which is that those who say they want to see the reemergence of the American workers' movement, they want to see the reemergence of an American trade union movement worthy of the name. Well, if that happened, then you would end up in a crash course with the American ruling class, a course for absolute collision. And some of the people in the American trade union movement do actually know that, which is why they capitulate so quickly. But we are, I would argue, approaching a point where these massive contradictions that are built up and up and up that are facing the US working class, build up for 40 plus years. These are going to break open pretty soon. And all the fake frontiers in the world won't be able to save the academic noodlers like Chris Cutrone, Daniel Tutt, and others when these things do break open, because it's going to lead to a class war in the United States on the scale of which we haven't seen probably since the 1930s. And that's what will happen. But I don't think any of these social democratic noodlers really want that to happen. They want the ruling class to come to their senses, realize they need to give a bit to the working class, open up some new frontiers, allow Chris to open that colony in Nunavut, and then and then stability will be restored.
Yeah, I mean, I know I would I talk about imperialism and bring up Zizek is a bit problematic, but I do think that a lot of him, I find it useful ideologically, because they want to have this decaf politics. Yeah. So they want to have revolution without revolution. They want to still maybe subconsciously or unconsciously want capitalism without capitalism. They still think they can try to square that circle without having to confront the serious challenges and to really risk the period of disorder that would likely be part of that. I think they don't. I think it's one thing to think about in the past revolutions or things over in other places, but to actually have that disorder and unease where they are, I don't think they want that at all. I think they think they can polite their way out of this kind of DSA Silver Lake barbecues or something. If they just say it right or get the chart right, then somehow it'll, I don't know. And then if not that, then this frontier thing, then why not? So there's that very kind of PMC kind of Tut-esque type thing, and then there's the fuck it, why not Trump? Why not take Greenland? Why not this empire liberty? Go go go.
Yeah. Well, this again, you're
because again, that's
right.
Someplace outside of Chicago where he is, I'd imagine.
Yeah, which is that you take the struggle far away from you and your own social position. Meaning that let Trump have the frontier. Maybe that'll revive things, or let's go along with Biden and the Democrats, and maybe
greater Israel is for the greater good. I don't know, why not? Well, I think that'll be his next piece, and especially with Compact. Why not greater Israel?
Well, he's already almost gone there, hasn't he? And he's Cutrone's response to October the 7th, accusing everybody else of being essentially like an anti-Semite or a reactionary or whatever formulation he used there. Yes, I mean it's all about pushing the struggles away, like finding a new frontier, pushing the problems elsewhere, which just goes to show how much bourgeois ideology has thoroughly infiltrated these supposedly Marxist organizations. Because let's just use the concept of the frontier again. The frontier, if we're going to use the American imperialist term here, we're going to use American imperialism as our example. the frontier goes from being internal to the United States to being global, which is that you, as an imperialist power, you push your problems out into the world. Now that can come through like getting the dirtiest jobs that no longer can be done profitably inside the United States done in China or later on in Bangladesh or Cambodia or Indonesia.
Cheap raw materials,
yeah, cheap raw materials from African nations such as, of course, Nigeria, Congo, etc. So you push certain of those problems out over there. You then are able to push certain other problems away because through having the international reserve currency, you can do what the Keynesians and the modern monetary theorists want you to do, which is what a lot of the American left were invested in for a while, which is the whole modern monetary theory, made possible, as Kelton admitted, by the fact that this is an international reserve currency, which is, until fairly recently, looking unchallenged in terms of its ability to always have buyers for the dollars that they create. And with that, you can, of course, again, the frontier becomes global because you are able, through the exercise of that unique privilege, to transplant your problems elsewhere. You owe, if you've created...
Are you telling me that was the main driving force of globalization, not fantastic integration and cosmopolitanism?
I think we might be onto something there.
Okay, go ahead.
I thought it was a coffee. I'm disappointed too, Tara. I thought it was a Starbucks in every street corner that you could get different varieties of syrup in. But it turned out
they almost managed that. Just as an aside, I'll never forget. I'm sorry, I just have to, because what was it, 2001? Yeah. I was in Shanghai for a year in 2001. And I remember I was traveling around with a friend of mine in Beijing, and we went into the Forbidden City, and I shit you not, there was a Starbucks inside the Forbidden City. It has since been taken out because I guess they couldn't take it, but there wasn't like a great sign. There was some sort of like kiosk, like like souvenirs or bathrooms. And I saw a little sign. I'm like, is that a Starbucks sign? Like a little thing outside the door. And I go in there, and there was a Starbucks inside the Forbidden City. I was like, oh my God. Anyway.
I think we can track the swings and roundabouts of the differing lines in the Chinese in the Communist Party of China via the presence of Starbucks in key Chinese locations or not. So you were there in the Yang Zemin era, so you get a prominent Starbucks. You go back there now, it's probably been replaced by something of Chinese origin under Xi Jinping.
Yeah, no. Last thing I heard, it wasn't there, and they were trying to sort it out. Like, okay, but it's a Starbucks, but there's a lot of like local like Chinese tea and whatnot. But then the last thing I heard was that whoever had decided that said no, we can't. That's a bit too. It's a bit too much. I'm like, they have, like In-N-Out burgers at the Great Wall of China or something. I don't know. Pizza Hut, there were tons of pizza for some reason. I know you have to go. Anyway, I'll have to finish this thought. For some reason, I don't know if this is still the case, but I used to travel around a bit before I was domesticated. Everywhere was Pizza Huts and KFCs. Oftentimes also McDonald's, but Burger King. But what I saw the most of, and always together, were KFCs and Pizza Huts. Anyway.
Oh yeah, I saw the same thing when I was in Malaysia, 2007. It was like KFCs everywhere, and for some strange reason, Kenny Rogers chicken. That had made it over there because that's what Malaysia needed,
Well, maybe Kenny Rogers was big there.
Well, maybe they saw the Big Lebowski, heard that weird song of his that was on the soundtrack. And thought, we'll have the chicken. Or they saw the Seinfeld episode,
I forgot he had a chicken thing or put his name on it. Although he has the thing, he has the Colonel face. Anyway, side thing. We have to wrap this up because I know you have to go soon. And okay, how are we going to put a pin in this? I have something I'm going to throw out, and you can choose to ignore it, or you can roll with it. We'll see how your improv does. Because in terms of this, empire of liberty, and also the Bible quotes and whatnot, I mean, you can read this in a kind of imperialist capitalist way, or a bourgeois, Nietzschean way.
Mm.
or either way. I guess anyway, those aren't always together. But also, there's the phrase, workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. The Socialist Internationale. So I don't, which I think. Oftentimes people think that Marx was all about equality, but he didn't talk about equality that much, about freedom. And I think, development and this type of thing, species being and all that. But what would be the form and content then? I know you have to speculate, but what would be the form and content of that type of empire of liberty, or even call it an empire of like a Soviets of liberty? How would that form and content be different from what the last Marxist is offering here? And I also have to wonder if he meant the last Marxist, ironically, like the Last Jedi movie, like he was going to be like the last one. Like this has gone off the rails. It's corrupted. Yeah. I'm going to be the last Marxist.
He's going to be the last Marxist, in the same sense of the Last Jedi, in that he's ultimately owned by Disney.
So you can take one of those, both of them, or none of them, and land this plane.
I think that it's worth just jumping off your discussion point there regarding the Marxist view of freedom, because I think this is something which needs to be developed much more than we perhaps have been developing it in those of us who are Marxist Leninists in our own discussions, because I think we've allowed the likes of Cutrone, through his bourgeois individualist framing, to claim this way too much. And libertine, we have libertine framing, even worse. We've allowed them, I think, for perhaps too long, to actually claim this mantle of like the defenders of like the free individual, the inheritors of the Enlightenment tradition, etc. Whereas in actual fact, they're not the inheritors. They are, if anything, if nothing else, they are sort of battle reenactors rather than anything real.
That's another thing that keeps on coming up with our conversations, this reenactment, Civil War reenactment, Bernie reenactment, Corbyn reenactment.
Yeah, because
frontier
reenactment, because it not only is it a safe thing to do, but also it can be exciting. And if, as you have said before, if this politics in this age is not about real and material things, it's just about enjoyment, then why not engage in a simulation, an intellectual simulation? Why not do that rather than actually grapple with the very difficult material realities? And
so, Alex, I have a kid situation. I'm just going to drop out for a second. Can you keep talking? I'll be back in a minute.
I will keep talking.
Okay, keep talking.
So to complete the thought here, to go back to the Marxist conception of freedom, which is something which, again, we do not necessarily talk about nearly enough. If you go and read the works of, say, Stalin and the works of Mao, or indeed Lenin himself, you read about the situation that was being developed in the Soviet Union in the 1920s and 1930s with regard to the system that was being built there, you start to see a clear distinction with regard to the different conceptions of the freedom of the individual that were popularized under bourgeois thought, and that which is popularized or started to be popularized in the 20s and 30s in the Soviet period, and later on in certain periods of Chinese history. And this is typified in the interviews that were done between Stalin and two representatives of the West, H.G. Wells being one of them. The dialogue between Stalin and H.G. Wells actually is all about this differing conceptions of freedom, with H.G. Wells, the Fabian socialist and enthusiastic eugenicist, by the way, basically playing the role of critic of Stalin and making all these points about individual liberty, and Stalin responds with a robust defense of the concept of freedom of the proletariat under the dictatorship of the proletariat, meaning that for the first time the great majority have the chance of actual, to use a more modern term, actual self-actualization under this system, because suddenly you have the ability, the start of the ability of the working class as a whole to be a wholly rounded human being. and a wholly rounded human being in the sense of not only having the responsibility of working, but also of playing their role in the planning of the economy and state and the management of that and the implementation of those plans, but also being wholly rounded in the sense of cultural advancement, be having the time and the resources to actually develop themselves as a cultural being in a way that they would never have been able to do under the Tsardom, of course, that you cannot do under capitalism. What you get as culture under capitalism is largely slop served up in a bucket by Hollywood and delivered to you whether you like it or not, and they'll charge you for the privilege. So this concept of freedom, I think, needs to be seen more as how we as Marxist-Leninists are in favor of the all-around the development of the human in terms of being free not only from basic material want, but also free from intellectual underdevelopment, which is a key part of how capitalism maintains its control and how the bourgeois ideology maintains its stranglehold over the imagination of the masses. And it is that concept of all-encompassing freedom, which can only come through collective action, which we stand for and defend, in comparison to the likes of Chris Cutrone and others who keep doing this sort of retreats to the Enlightenment, but an Enlightenment thought which has been separated from material reality and therefore has become reactionary by the fact that it seeks to cover up contradictions rather than.
It wouldn't be fair to say that even at its peak was only something that was accessible by a small minority.
Yes, only accessible by a small minority, but at least in its progressive, at least in that period, there was a relatively progressive edge to it because the bourgeoisie were at least a rising class that were actually taking the productive forces and therefore the culture of these societies forward. You try and apply it now in a period of decaying imperialism, then you're only carrying out a reactionary act because you're defending, whether you know it or not, the actual power of the existing ruling class, which is now long since past its sell-by date.
All right. Well, Alexander, I like it when you put on your laser eyes.
So I got the glasses on today, you know?
Yeah. Although I didn't have him as being as full-on Superman laser eyes as we did with Tut, but you know, it's a longer story there. Anyway, we're just having fun, people. We don't really want to vaporize anyone, okay? There's some ideas we may want to get rid of, but anyway, please, let's see if I can put this on here. Please do, for those of you who don't, this is Alexander is the editor-in-chief, whatever, chairman of Marx Engels Lenin Institute, and he's at X at Marx Engels Lenin, but with LNIN. And he's streaming like four times a week. Also, sometimes with Click Clarenberg, you get top shelf content, man.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All the good stuff available on the YouTube channel. Please swing by if you haven't done so already. And
you have something going on tomorrow, don't you? Or is this only for party people?
Oh no, this
because
is
I have this ready if you want to say something.
Yeah, this is I'm speaking at this tomorrow. It's public meeting at in Southall on how the left failed Syria. So I'm going to be speaking at that along with other comrades from the CPGBML. If you're in the area, do come down. It'll be a very interesting discussion, and we're going to be touching on a lot of some of the same things we've been talking about today, but specifically with reference to how the British left in particular failed to mount any serious opposition to the 13-year-long war and siege sanctions on Syria. So come along tomorrow, and I promise there'll be all kinds of interesting things under discussion.
And it's anticipating the next in the why not series, like why not Syria? Why not the Fourth Reich? Why not?
Why not perhaps a Fifth Reich? You know?
Yes, or the new reincarnation, or still of Rome, or whatever it is. I jest. Okay, so thank you very much, Alexander. Again, people, I wanted to give my full attention to what he was saying, and so I wasn't able to look at the comments very much. I am going to. If anybody has, if the best way to get a comment or a question to me and Alexander is probably both on the X. And I have, there's both, he is, there's the, on this particular tweet when I'm saying like, hey, this is the, announcing this program, or other ways, because I do, in a perfect world, I'd have, I'd be able to make one of my kids, do that, but they are what they are. And so single person ship. So I don't want to say, I wish I could look all over them, but we just don't have the time. But if you can figure out a way to get them to me, I will. We will do our best to collate them and maybe dress them in a theme-based basis, both the negative ones and the positive ones.
Yes, exactly. All good fun.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Alexander. And I will see you next time.
Thank you, Tara. It's a pleasure as always.
Yes. Thank you. Bye. All right. So that was our fourth bad Trot or bad Marxist, in quotes, takes with Alexander Mckay. I should say that we're going to have one not with Alexander, but who is coming up? Let me see if I can find that. With the social populist Garrett Ramirez. He's going to do a bad anarcho-capitalist takes with me on Sunday at 4 p.m. And this is our friend Thaddeus Russell. And he's going to be we're going to be talking about both of his recent comments about conflating, let's see, Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin, and also his idea that communism always and everywhere will mean forced collectivization, even if it were to take root in contemporary America. So Garrett's going to give us his take on that, and me as well. Sunday, 4 p.m. UK time, and what is that? 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. Thank you very much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Please do like, subscribe, share, etc. This is a new channel. I'm learning as I go, but I hope that you see the value in it. And, I'll try to be the best mother of the horde that I can. All right. Take care, everyone, and see you next time.